Welcome to A Woman's Work, Cheering on Change. I'm Adrienne Lawrence, an attorney, former ESPN anchor, and also author of Staying in the Game, the playbook for beating workplace sexual harassment. I'm really delighted that you all could join us this evening for an incredible discussion with an award-winning film as the backdrop. That film is A Woman's Work, the NFL cheerleader problem. In this feature documentary, football and feminism collide, as the film follows two former NFL cheerleaders who file class action lawsuits against their teams in the league alleging wage theft and illegal employment practices. After more than 50 years of pervasive silence, these young women expose the gender inequities at the heart of pro football, tackling exile from their communities and the jobs they love. And this is a fight that is big, and it's also a microcosm of the battle women wage across all industries today. And fortunately, we have four accomplished women to speak with us about the struggle. First, we have attorney Mkimba Pate. That's founder and host of the Pro Cheerleading podcast, The Truth Behind the Palms. Mkimba is also a former NFL cheerleader for the Seattle Seahawks, including Super Bowl appearances. We also are joined by Lacy Thibodeaux Fields, a former NFL Oakland Raiderette who filed a class action lawsuit against the Raiders in January 2014, winning a historic $1.25 million settlement that paid over 100 cheerleaders working for the team. Also, the lawyer that represented Lacy in this monumental win joins us. That's Sharon Vinnick. She's a partner at Levy Vinnick. And as a plaintiff's employment lawyer, Sharon's represented individuals in gender discrimination and wage theft cases. Sharon's also represented the cheerleaders suing the New York Jets. And last but not least, lawmaker, game changer, Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher. Assemblywoman Fletcher, well, she was elected in 2013 to represent California's 80th district and is the first Latina to hold this role. She passed critical bills to protect vulnerable employees. She also happens to be a recovering lawyer and was a cheerleader during her days at Stanford when she rooted on now Senator Cory Booker when he played football. So thank you all for joining us. And also, let's go ahead and get this thing started. We will have a moment for questions, but let's talk to some of the cheerleaders on the panel, or former cheerleaders. What initially attracted you to the sport? Lacy?
Okay, I'll go first. I like most little girls in America, I grew up dancing from a Southern community where football is life. It's just about being a part of something bigger than just yourself. And I just love to perform. It's just where my talents have always lied. So get me out there where everyone's competing and the whole town's together. I mean, who doesn't want to be a part of that?
Yeah, I can jump in. I would agree. I'm a big sports fan, definitely a football head. So for me, being on the field, performing and dancing, of course, I love to dance. And I think a lot of women enjoy the performance aspect of it and connecting with fans. I love the seat that we have on the field to watch the game, frankly. So it's the best seat in the house. I felt the same way about basketball. But it's just, like she said, you know, you're connected to something so much larger. You're cheering in front of thousands of people. And it's exhilarating. It's the best high I think I've ever experienced, for sure.
Lorena?
I'll just agree. You know, I wasn't a professional cheerleader, but I did cheer in college and high school. I'm a reformed dancer turned cheerleader. There's a lot of us who started off as dancers and realized as you get older, there's only so much opportunity to perform. You keep looking for that opportunity and you find cheerleading. So along with that, of course, you know, there's nothing better for a woman who loves football and loves basketball and loves to be right there in the middle of it and to cheer on a team and be part of a team. And so cheerleading was a natural for me.
Absolutely. And you know, they say sport for cheerleading, but it wasn't always thought that way. And it's historically been misclassified. So Lorena, if you can build on, why do you think that it really needs to be illuminated that this work needs to be done for this sport in particularly?
Well, it was interesting because we actually ran the bill to make cheerleading at the same time, not only classified as employees, professional cheerleaders, but cheerleading a sport in California. For years, it was not viewed as a sport. We could not get CIF, which is our governing board in the state, to recognize cheerleading as a sport. So for the first time in history, we legislated a sport. And that was important. I mean, it goes along with the rest of the things we were doing. I'm a former labor leader, an attorney, and a former cheerleader. So when I actually heard about Lacy's lawsuit, it was maybe my first or second year in the legislature, and it just upended me, right? This is so obvious. We're talking about, in a stadium where every single person gets at least basic labor protections. It doesn't matter if you're cleaning up after people. It doesn't matter if you're the trainer, if you're the mascot, if you're the football player, if you're, every single person on that field has some protections except the one that's dominated by women. And so to me, it was such a clear case of wage theft, along with really disrespecting the work of women. And the arguments against it were so sexist that I literally was like, I got to do this bill. I got to make sure, at least in California, that there's no question that these women, whether they're dancers for NBA or cheerleaders, that they're paid as regular employees. They sign an employment contract. I mean, it's obvious. So, that's how I felt, at least.
Absolutely. And being able to recognize it as a sport and give it the respect that it deserves, bringing with it, the right to pay adequately without question. And Sharon, as one of the lawyers who represented Lacy's case against the former Oakland Raiders, why do you think it's been so difficult to really resolve issues of fair pay and wage theft?
Well, I think that there are a couple of impediments here. The first thing is, in the context of cheerleading, I don't think that everybody understands that you can't just volunteer your time regardless of how much you might like doing the work. So even when Lacy came to talk with us originally, it wasn't clear to her that, it was wage theft. She just thought, well, they had, told her she was lucky to be doing this, and it was a great opportunity, and it was something she loved to do. So part of it is there's just a lack of basic understanding about what the labor laws are. But I think that part of it in the cheerleading context is just definitely a gender issue. I mean, there were times that women, I'm sure, had made noises about this over time. I mean, the Buffalo Jills unionized many years ago, and then the union was thrown out. So there's this sense that if you make noise, you're just going to be thrown out, or you won't be accepted for the team next year. So there are institutional reasons that these women in particular are encouraged to keep their mouths shut and just get out in the field and dance.
Yes. And Makiba, why has it taken so long for cheerleaders to be considered athletes, despite the fact that it's so evident the athletic ability that's required? And, it just really seems that there's a lot of denial there, just so that they can not have the same rights as everyone else who's performing a job.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with the way that cheerleaders have, especially for the NFL, have been marketed. I mean, during a telecast, for 2 seconds that you might see a cheerleader on the screen, we're rallying with our pom-poms, but you don't see any of the routines that we spent hours and hours preparing for all week shown, where you actually can see our athleticism. It's just very, the way that we're marketed for swimsuit calendars, you're just getting a very one-sided view most of the time as to what we actually bring to the game day entertainment. And so I think it's easy for people to have the takeaway that we're definitely beautiful faces on the sidelines and aren't athletes that are actually jumping up and down, dancing, performing, working our butts off for 4 hours during a football game. So I think it has a lot to do with what they see on TV. I think some teams are better about showing the other multifaceted aspects of what we do. But I think by and large, the perception is just that we're just there on the sidelines looking like Disney princesses, frankly, and there's so much more that goes into it.
Which is odd to me, because it's clear just by looking at you all, you are definitely doing things that I could not do. And thus there is athleticism to it. But they will come up with every reason not to be able to pay people right. So that is something we will have to fight against. And so I was wondering, Lacy, what helped you feel confident enough to pursue this case? What was it that gave you courage?
Well, it was definitely something I had to stew over all season. This was not something I could just, decide overnight. I was, talking about giving up my dream. I'd worked my whole life to finally get to where I was, and to find out that it was nothing as I expected. And after talking with Sharon, she was very honest with me. She said, Lacy, you have a case. It's a real big case. Like, you could change everything, but you need to understand, you will never dance again if you do this. And to hear those words after I had just made the team, I was sick about it. I was. And it's not to say that my season with the Raiderettes wasn't some of the best memories of my life. So there were moments in the season when I don't know if I can do this. And there were other nights when I felt, you know, undervalued and underappreciated. And I was fed up with how they were treating me and my friends and our team. And I'm definitely going to do this. There's like no doubt in my mind. And then there were moments at the game we had just won. And it's like, I can't do this, you know? And it came down to the end of the season, and I sat on it, and I had to come up with the choice to give it up. If I did it, I was going to give it up. And I felt like it was worth it to me. And I don't have regrets. Do I miss it? Of course I miss it. But am I so proud of what I've done, the conversations that we've had about it, the changes that were made? There's so much more that needs to be done, but like, at least we're having a conversation about it now, you know, so it was worth it. I do miss it though.
And when you were told that you would essentially have to walk away from the industry, was it the thought of walking away, or was it that you'd be pushed out?
Maybe both. I'm a person who, I hate when people are upset with me. I don't like to not be liked. I love everyone. Even if you hate me, I'm gonna be like, let's be friends, just like me, you know? So I take it really heavy when people aren't happy with me for whatever reason. So it was hard to like know that, oh no, not everyone's on my side, or people, you know, view me as someone they don't know me. That's hard to take on. But I mean, we did it. At the end of the day, I turned off my Facebook and I paid attention to my family, and I focused on the bigger picture the whole way through, and I just didn't look back.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we have to do, and we have to get over kind of that thought of not being liked, because the fact is that we have rights, and we need to enforce those. And anyone who does not want us to enforce our rights, to be paid equally and fairly, they're not for us, and they can go somewhere. So I'm glad that you stood up and fought.
Thank you.
I do want to say that notion that what other people think of us should dictate whether we make a life-changing decision like that. I mean, I've been practicing employment law for 30 years. I have never heard a man say that, ever. I mean, that's not the way the calculus goes. And part of working with Lacy and working with, I represent a lot of women clients, is to kind of reorient them to say, you need to stand up for right, because that's what's going to change things. And in our office, we happen to be all women attorneys in our office. And we'll often say to ourselves, yeah, what would the guys do? And I assure you, I've never had a male client say, well, I don't want to do this because people might not like me.
I also want to point out, I thought was really important, because we started talking about we're athletes, right? And we know that those of us who cheered, who've danced, we know how much work goes in and how many, I mean, it is comparable to male sports. But I want to be clear, if you were a Disney princess standing on the sidelines, you also deserve a minimum wage and job protection. So I think that this is really important. And I think about it in terms of other work that women sometimes do. And it doesn't matter if you have been hired because you're beautiful. It doesn't matter if your job is simply to stand there. If it is your job, if you are required to come at a certain time, if you have a contract, even without a contract, if you are dictated about how you look, what you're doing, you are an employee and you deserve the basic rights. And I think that's important, because women's work does spread around a whole bunch of things. And there are women out there today who are still disrespected. I mean, I don't want to get off into a tangent of sex work and other types of employment. We've had it in California with strippers and other things. That's still work. And so at some point we have to recognize that being beautiful isn't a reason to be discounted, and being appreciated for your beauty can be a job. And if men had a job by which they were appreciated for being good looking, they'd demand good pay. So like, we've got to figure that piece out too.
Absolutely. I think there's this underlying mentality and ideology that you are lucky to be here, and thus you should not be asking for fairness or equal treatment or equal pay. And we have to get past that and understand our value and enforce the fact that, no, you're lucky to have me, and you will treat me fairly, and you will enforce the laws and do right by me. And so that is something I've had my own journey with, being told I would never work in broadcast again if I stood up for myself, and I did not care. And I sued anyways, ending up becoming the first on-air personality to sue ESPN for workplace sexual harassment. And the thing is, you have to stand up and you have to make your own way in the aftermath. But at the end of the day, you know, if someone doesn't stand up, we're going to continue to be held down and subjugated, and that is not acceptable. And so let's move on to talk a little bit more about the gender pay gap. So we've seen that this pay gap has been lessening over the years, which is great, but still it's not moving quick enough. But there's been a lot of grassroots movements really promoting transparency. And so can you all give some insight to those who are watching on how they can make progress in their own respective fields when it comes to eliminating that pay gap?
Well, I think one of the things is that you should look to state law to see what your rights are. So for example, in California, it is illegal to prohibit employees from talking to each other about their wages. So that is a relatively new provision in California law in the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years. But one of the things is just to ask. I mean, there is no shame in trying to find out what the person sitting next to you is making. That is one thing to do. The second thing is California has also passed legislation that provides that your new employer or prospective employer cannot ask you what you were making in your former job. Because one of the reasons there's a wage gap between women and men is that it perpetuates over time. And that's true not just for the gender wage gap, but for the race wage gap. So to the extent that you can work with, you know, your legislatures to try to make sure that in each state there's legislation that permits employees to talk about their wages, prohibits employers from asking about their prior earnings, all of those things will help to improve the wage gap.
Thank you, Sharon.
I agree with Sharon. Of course, I was co-author on those bills, so they're important to me. But it's important to point out something in California, because although we have done so much work and we actually are #1 in reducing the wage gap between white women and other men, we actually have the worst wage gap when it comes to Latinas. And so we are literally number 50. We make 44 cents on the dollar of our white male counterpart. There's still a lot that's wrong. Why is that? #1, women's work is often devalued, right? So if you look at how, and I'll give you a perfect example in California, men are often considered custodians, women are considered janitors. I will tell you there's a huge wage gap between those two jobs, although they might functionally be doing the same thing. We have a lot of roles that women are placed into or self-select into that get devalued simply because they tend to attract immigrant women, in particular Latinas. African-American women also have a huge pay gap in California. But it's something that we have to be diligent about. And we have to be very specific about. I think, and I've tried a couple years now to have this legislation to really shame employers, to make them become transparent and be public about their wages that they're paying. Now, it may be legal why they're paying some men more than women. Maybe they've been there longer, maybe they have different qualifications, but come clean about it. Because I think if people did a little self-examination and started to become clean, that those things would change. I don't think they realize that even in traditional jobs, whether it's sportscasting or as CEOs, that women and men are being treated differently. And so I'm all into transparency and a little shame.
Yeah.
Can't go wrong with that.
No, not at all. And I think there was a lot of transparency at the federal level initially when Obama had passed a rule that essentially made employers log what they were paying people, including race, gender, ethnicity, just to try to reduce that amount of gap in wage and employment. But unfortunately, the Trump administration went ahead and kind of got rid of that rule. But hopefully that'll be something that comes in the Biden administration, because we do need transparency. And that really shows everyone kind of how you're treating people, because just claiming you have an anti-discrimination and an equal treatment policy, it's cute, but let's see what the actual numbers show. And so that would be nice if that changes so that we can all have that to kind of back ourselves up.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I also think that there's been kind of a sea change in the way women have approached their work lives in the wake of the Me Too movement. I mean, the Me Too movement obviously had to do with sexual harassment, but I find that the movement in general has empowered women to step forward, because there is this sense that now, unlike 10 years ago, people will believe them and take them seriously, whether they're making a claim about harassment or discrimination or denial of equal pay. So I think that that's made a big change in the conversation. I think we have lost Adrian for a minute here.
Yeah, you're right.
Uh-oh. Well, just, I think I'm supposed to be stepping into Adrian's shoes temporarily. Oh, there she is.
All right. I was wondering, I was like, did you all go somewhere or did I go somewhere?
Welcome back.
Now we know. Now we know. Thank you so much for your patience. I appreciate it. I don't even know necessarily where we left off, but I know we were talking about the gender wage gap and the fact that Me Too has really invigorated women to speak up. I think it does definitely play into the kind of that underlying ideology that I mentioned earlier of you're lucky to be here and thus you will tolerate anything I give you. And so when women realize, no, hey, I don't have to tolerate this, I think it also, you know, it jazzed it up, it pepped it up, it made people realize, hey, I can speak up on other things as well that I know are fundamentally unfair, like unequal pay, which is great. Because, you know, hey, I think gender discrimination across the board is problematic and it holds back our society, including our GDP. So it's for the best of our entire culture and civilization for us to be paid fair wages. And so let's talk a little bit about accountability, since we did talk about shaming, which also kind of works a little bit the same. But in the film, Sharon's colleague, Leslie, said that it's not enough for big companies in a multi-billion-dollar industry to pay $1 million here and $1 million there, that they really need to be held responsible. So how do you think we can move toward real accountability when it comes to the NFL or any large industry?
Well, I'll tell you something we're going to try to do in California this year, and it's really not a change in law, but of clarification. And that is to ensure that people and DAs know that they can hold executives accountable for wage theft in the same way they do for other larceny. You know, if you steal somebody's paycheck out of the mailbox, you're going to jail. But if you don't pay somebody their paycheck, even though you know that's the law, it is very rare. In fact, I think almost non-existent where you'll be sent to jail. And so employees that steal from their employers often go to jail. And so we want to at least have this discussion. I mean, it's tough because I'm also a proponent of criminal justice reform. I don't want to, you know, fill up our jails, but we do want to start treating employers who know that they're doing something wrong, which is taking away the money that somebody has earned in the same way as somebody coming into your house and stealing that money. And so that's something we're working on this year. And I think even just having it out there as an idea that you can't just pay a fine and, you know, make it go away, that there is a personal responsibility for the people who know that they're stealing so often from marginalized communities, whether they be women of color, in particular immigrants. That's usually where we find this. And so we're gonna try to hold some folks a little bit more accountable.
Absolutely.
Great.
I think when it comes to an entity like the NFL, accountability definitely becomes tricky, because I think from my observation of the lawsuits over time and sometimes just the ask, can you at least just sit down with the cheerleaders and talk to us and understand what our concerns are and be willing to address them? I just think there's a sense that they don't have to give us a seat at the table. And that's what we really need to figure out, how we can kind of collectively demand that and command that respect to at least have it be addressed. Like, I don't know how they're going to address, you know, the issues that for the Washington football team, for example, that came up with their cheerleaders, you know, with the NFL stepping into the investigation. How are you going to actually make reforms and do anything to change the situation, not just for that particular football team, but look at all the cheerleading teams across the leagues and figure out what needs to be done if we're not there as part of the conversation? I'm retired, I get it, but I do think that there needs to be a sense that we are accountable to you as women of our league, and that's definitely missing, and that's just something that we're going to have to really push for.
Absolutely.
I do think, to the extent that you can also get women moving up the chain, so that when you're having discussions about what to do about the cheerleader problem, it's not a bunch of, you know, old guys who are talking about this and just see it as, you know, these beautiful women standing at the sidelines. I mean, if you had some women sitting at the table and having those conversations as, you know, owners and coaches and, you know, whatever the organization has, that would change the conversation. And I think that's true. I mean, look, when we brought this case, it was, from our perspective, just like a perfect example to talk about the bigger issue of wage theft, okay? And the issue of wage theft is that there are all these people, as the Assemblywoman has talked about, who are just not getting paid their wages. And a lot of that, you have these marginalized communities where the people at the top of the corporation are not from those communities. They don't have respect for those communities, and they're not looking towards those communities. So as we try to diversify, I mean, in California, there's discussions about trying to require corporations to have diversity on their boards. That sort of thing is going to change this discussion in other industries.
Absolutely. Lacy, did you have any thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking throughout this whole conversation, at the end of it, all I really wanted was for the Raiders to say, you are right. Shame on us. We're sorry. You know, we love our Raiderettes. You're part of our family. We are so sorry we did not pay better attention to y'all. There's so many things they could have said to make it right. I mean, and they just couldn't do it. They just couldn't do it. And that was what was so disappointing. You know, they wanted to change the contract under the table. They wanted to pay the girls to have them clock in and out now and not make a big announcement about it. You know, they didn't want to stand up and say, look, we're doing the right thing. You know, it was just, they just couldn't do it. And that was so hard.
It's absolutely, it's very disheartening when you see these outlets and entities refuse to do the right thing. Because essentially at the end of the day, they're upholding the patriarchy, white supremacy, whatever it is, but this acknowledgement that, hey, you are whole people entitled to fairness and fair treatment. They cannot give up the privilege of not being able to say that. So it's one of those things that it's so difficult to watch unfold, but knowing what you deserve and staying focused, I find goes a long way to continuing the fight. And so, yeah, Lacy, you really did it. And thank you so much. And I was wondering, what do you think in terms of whether or how can professional cheerleaders and people in similar situations really navigate that accountability from the inside? And Makiba too, please jump in as well.
Sure.
I wish I had the confidence then to maybe approach my director and have more conversations with more girls. You know, the idea of talking about our wage was so hush hush. Like, I didn't know at auditions when I'm standing in line with hundreds or thousands of girls competing for the position, I had no clue I wasn't going to get paid all year, or that I was going to have to be spending my money all year, and working my butt off and giving all I had, all my talents for maybe, you know. I didn't know that. But I wish like I would have had more conversations. I felt it on the inside. I approached Sharon. I had conversations with my husband and one or two girls. But I wish I would have said, excuse me, guys, I have a question for all 40 of you. Does it bother anyone that this is our contract? Does anyone else feel the way that I feel? I wish I could have, you know, been brave and had a voice then, and not, you know, been whispering and doing everything, you know, ashamed of what I was about to do. I wish I was braver then. So maybe, you know, my advice to women out there, like, just take your moment and speak up and talk about it with other women, and don't keep it to yourself. And hopefully that brings about change. And yeah.
Well, with the podcast, I mean, I definitely have this truth behind the palms mantra where discussing like the beautiful aspects of what we do and the relationships and the dynamics, and also just the really tough parts. And Lacy, when I hear you mention, you know, wishing you had the opportunity to speak up to your teammates more, or maybe having conversations with your director, but the reality is, especially if you're a rookie on the team, the attitude is you should just be absolutely silent and learn the ropes and just shut up and dance and stay quiet and don't really ask those kind of questions. And you're looked at, I think, sometimes on the squads. Unfortunately, this is just the reality of it. I'm hoping it'll change. I'm very hopeful that it'll change. But the reality is, I think those people that come into a program and don't go with the flow, question too much, you know, you have a mark on your back. And I think sometimes you don't make it back when you audition for the following year to make the team. Directors can have a wonderful reaction to being questioned in terms of their authority, or they can be feeling threatened by it. I think one thing that we also have to realize, especially in terms of just the management structure, the director's positions are even more competitive and hard to come by. So I think the people that are in these leadership positions are really reluctant to, you know, having their position challenged in any real way. So I think the reality is, I mean, Lacy, if you had, taking that approach of reaching out to your teammates.
Right.
It's something that just drives me crazy, but I don't know that there really would be support. And so when I think accountability, I think there really has to be a shift in our sense as a pro cheerleading community of like our accountability to each other, because we can't just leave somebody all out there by themselves. If we know that we're all experiencing the same thing, we have a duty to each other, I think, to support one another and be willing to not privately message me and say, oh, you were so right, I'm so glad you said that at practice, but to actually be willing to say, whether it's 5 or 2 or 3 people that are willing to say, I agree with what you're saying, I have the same concerns, and then maybe 3 or 5 people going to the director and having a conversation may be met with a little bit more, I don't know, openness. But that's the thing that I'd like to see, is just us having a sense of being accountable to each other and not this infighting and just the separation and division that I see that happens, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah. You want to talk about a real sisterhood. Why don't you support each other through the stuff that really matters? Stop saying you're my sister if you're not going to support me. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it seems that there's that it's been kind of this long held thing with major employers or large employers or employers in general, that, hey, if you do speak out, you do end up, like Makiba said, have a target, a mark on your back. And the fact is, if you don't have that unity with your colleagues, then, it's easy for them to get rid of one person, and then it becomes really kind of just a show for everyone else to suggest you better not speak up or you're going to end up like them. And that silencing there and that intimidation really seems to resonate to keep people down. So having a unified front, or preferably a union, goes a long way. Mm-hmm. And, hey, since we're talking to some extent about unions, Lorena, how do you think people can get involved in supporting local legislation to make change?
Well, you hit it on the head there. And first of all, I want to tell Lacy, it pains me to say you wish you were more brave, because you were so brave. I mean, so incredible, right? So never say that. Like, for all of us, it was like, I think any of us who've been in those situations know how difficult that must have been. I could also tell you stories when we were doing the legislation about Charger girls coming in my office. I'm in San Diego, right? And so different groups. There was a small group of people who were totally for it, and then a group of women who said that they were against it. And as they're leaving, there was one woman who stays back and passes me a note with her phone number, like, I'm not really against this. I mean, the fear that these women had. And so you're brave. I'll just start with that. But Thanks. One of the things we thought in California, honestly, and maybe it does come from being out of labor movement, is before we could get the kind of unity you would need to take this on with the NFL, first you had to have employee status. The way that NFL cheerleaders for so long had been designated, sometimes it was independent contractors, sometimes it was glorified volunteers from what I could tell, even though they were signing what we would consider an employment contract, right? It was like, and we all know that one of the best ways to take away somebody's rights is to classify them as an independent contractor. And that's basically what they were doing. And so then you can't challenge things like, discrimination. And I mean, we have some laws now on sexual harassment, but very little other things that you could even, basically use the court system to require, because you're saying as an independent contractor that you're your own business. We know that was a falsehood. And so that's why we did the legislation first to say statutorily, and NFL or professional cheerleaders and dancers in California code are one of only 3 types of workers that are statutorily employees: roofers, and IHSS workers are the other, home healthcare workers. And it was because we found no other way we could tackle this at the time. A lot has changed since in some laws and some court cases, but we're like, okay, we're going to make them statutorily employees, so they'll have these rights and they'll be able to, they'll start with that assertion, and hopefully one day they'll figure out that they have the right to organize. And if they can cause that sisterhood to come together and to decide that they want a union, I mean, the world changes, right? And then they're able to take on an institution like the NFL. I'd love to see, like in the movie, the NFL Players Association, the union be supportive, right? So that I think is my dream, is, maybe in California, I don't know if, I don't think any other states have passed a law to deem them employees, but they are under, I don't know how they're getting away with this under any law, but to be able to organize themselves and have that sisterhood and have that barrier so that when one speaks up, they have the unity of all of them. So that would be my dream. And then we could talk about, you know, why minimum wage isn't enough and why there should be more, you know, added additional benefits that these women should be gaining, because we know your benefit. We know what you're doing. You're making the team money. There's a reason they have them. I mean, it's time.
Absolutely. And let me kick a question to Sharon that someone has asked in the audience about pay. So the question is, can two women who are doing the same job but are paid differently be considered a form of wage discrimination, or does discrimination only apply to women-men pay discrepancy?
So there are two different ways that you can get at discrimination. One of them is the Equal Pay Act, okay? And the Equal Pay Act is a gender. It has to do with men and women and whether they're paid differently for performing the same job using the same skills, okay? There's also a way that you can get at discrimination that's not gender, but would be age, disability, race, national origin, and that's just under the Fair Employment and Housing Act. So if you have two women who in all characteristics are the same, okay? They're both two Black women who have the same job experiences. You can't bring a discrimination case based upon that. If you have two women who are different, like one of them's white and one of them's Black, you absolutely could bring a claim for discrimination there. And there is one other thing that I want to say. When women stand up, or men stand up, when you are a whistleblower and you are retaliated against for being a whistleblower, that in and of itself is illegal. Now, I'm not saying that those are slam dunk cases that you can easily prove, but if you stand up and you're treated differently or terminated, or you know your job responsibilities change because you are a whistleblower, that's illegal under state and federal law. So there are protections for people who decide to come forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And one of you had mentioned before about exposing the salaries or talking about salaries of our colleagues. So is, you know, are employers kind of obligated to share that information, or also are salaries posted for positions when it comes to cheerleading as well?
So there's no legal obligation for an employer to share that information. There's an obligation or a prohibition against stopping you from sharing that information. So if I want to talk with my fellow employees about what I make of all my compensation, that's perfectly legal in the state of California. And actually, even in this day and age, I've represented most recently this last summer a woman who was terminated for talking about her wages with some of her fellow employees. You cannot do that in the state of California. But publishing wage tables or advertising at the beginning exactly what the wages are going to be, that is not required.
Thank you for that. That was very helpful. And I also kind of want to touch upon building community of support when you do challenge, in terms of not necessarily in the company, but on the outside, because it isn't easy. Like you said, Lacy, you shut off your Facebook. How is it navigating conversations with colleagues, family, friends, and the rest of the world when they don't think that you are entitled to be paid fair wages, or when you're willing to challenge the system? Go ahead, Lacy.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I was like, is this me?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's very frustrating. And anyone who knows me, like, I'm very passionate when I speak, and I'm not afraid to say, no, this is work. You can't do what I'm doing. There's thousands of girls. You chose me for a reason. You're lucky to have me. So I don't know. It's always like being confident in who you are, knowing what you deserve, knowing your worth, and just saying it over and over and over again. I don't care if you don't agree, but you're going to hear me regardless. And I just have that attitude about so many things now. Like, I'm just like, this is the new me. Like, I'm going to say my heart. I'm going to have no regrets. And you're either going to love me or hate me, but this is what you're going to get. And I'm always going to do what's right so I can live with myself and my children can be proud of me. So I don't know if I even answered your question.
You did. It was absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. Because the thing is, you're right in terms of if people don't necessarily support you, you know what you're doing is right and that it needs to be done. And also too, at least in my experience, when I sued ESPN, I would get random messages from people of support or just random high fives from people. And that meant a lot. And I think it keeps you going along the way especially when you think, oh, what am I doing? I can't do this. This is difficult. But you remember why you're doing it. Absolutely. Was there ever a time, Lacy, where you felt like I can't go on?
No, I don't think so. And really, it was kind of lucky at a time when it was just blowing up in the media and I was getting all these threats in Oakland. My husband got transferred to London. And I'm like, we're going. We're leaving the country. It was just such a great escape. In my reaction to my friends in London, they were like, you go, girl. It was amazing. They just didn't understand how I didn't have that kind of support in America. And so it was just kind of an escape from it all, and just let it all play out on its own. And so no, I never had that moment like, I can't do this. I'm not going to say it was easy all the time, but my team, my sisterhood became Levy, Bennett, Burrow, and Hines. Like, those were my teammates now. My teammates that were on my team, they weren't standing with me, but I had confidence in all the women there. And, and they huddled around me and we got through it.
That's all you can do. And we do have another question for the panel, and this might be directed towards Sharon. But was there ever a conversation about how the NFL was paying the mascot fair yearly salary wages, I think $65,000, but then paying the cheerleaders less than minimum wage?
Well, it depends what you define as a conversation, because we were talking about it. I mean, that was something that we talked about from the very beginning. But in terms of legal traction, there's no requirement that, two jobs that are probably not exactly the same have to be paid in the same way. So although, we talked about it endlessly in court papers and in interviews, all we could get at the end of the day legally is to make sure that they were paid minimum wage. And I think that issue in particular is completely about gender. Because it's not just that the mascot is paid $65,000, but, some, young man, because we're talking about football, right, who's a bench warmer, who's only on the practice team, is paid minimally $100,000 a year. I mean, understandably, that young man could be injured, but so could the dancers who are dancing, on the sidelines and working and have all kinds of their own injuries. And, the fact that the cheerleaders are being paid minimum wage, whereas that kid who's sitting on the bench is being paid $100,000, I don't have any explanation for that other than gender, because certainly the, fans are appreciating the cheerleaders a lot more than the kid who's the bench warmer.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but
oh, go ahead, please.
But it's just so ironic because to reach the level of a professional status. I mean, these are professional cheerleaders, professional dancers who have worked their whole life, similar to an athlete, where they have mastered their skill. They're competing for these spots against the best of the best, and they're selected because they are the best of the best. And so to have a minimum wage as the marker of what that is worth is just insulting, because there's only 26 NFL teams with cheerleaders, and you're talking about maybe 28 to 40 dancers that are part of these teams, and there's just minimum wage is not what we should stop. I mean, and I get real feisty about it, but I just don't think that that's an appropriate marker for people who have reached the pinnacle of their career as dancers and performers. It's not enough.
And it's also interesting to me too, and it's not always just about, oh, you're a cheerleader. No, we want someone who can interview well. We want someone who's personable. We want someone who's approachable. Oh, but you have to be also great with children, because you're going to be working with the children in the community. And, you have to have all these skills. It's not, you have to be the whole package, but you're only worth minimum wage. It is
doesn't
crazy.
matter. It doesn't matter
at all.
And we have another question. Don't California sunshine laws require public employers to post wages?
Yes, but the NFL, these teams aren't public employers.
Yes,
yes, it's true. If you work for the city of San Francisco, there are requirements. And I don't think it's for every employee, but that's not my area of expertise. But for private employers, there's no equivalent.
Thank you.
Maybe Lorena could talk about that legislation next year.
It actually started making me think. I do want to take it back just though. I was thinking when you were asking Lacy about, what she faced. And I think there's some things we can't litigate and we can't legislate. And that's the fact that as women, we have to start teaching young women and girls that it's not a competition with each other, that we need to support each other. And I think the cheerleading in particular is a perfect example, because there are women, at least this is, you know, in my experience, women who were afraid to come to other women's defense because they thought, you know, they too could lose their position. And we're often pitted against each other in a competitive format. And yet you see men, especially in the NFL and everything, you know, they're still supportive of one another. They can still form a union, have that type of support. And that's great. But until we have that, I think there is a need to get women at an early age. Whenever I talk to young girls or women, I just say, you know, like, knock it off. Like, we got to support each other. Lacy should have had an army of women behind her. This is a great thing. But you have some women who think it's inappropriate for women to be cheerleaders, right? You have some women who are like, it's an honor and you shouldn't even get paid anything. You have some, you know, it's like, no, come on, we've got to be better. And we have been put in this system to compete against each other rather than to lift each other up. So it's always we got to remember that, because that has to change.
Absolutely. We are socialized in a way where we don't see it as people, you know, enforcing their rights or standing up. We only think that that is something men can do. And so it gets really problematic when women try to do it, because it's essentially taking your seat at the table and being a whole person. And we need to make sure that we raise young women and girls to claim that and to not let that socialization process, you know, with the patriarchy and whatnot hold you down. Not good things.
And we've seen successful examples of that in other professional women's sports. You know, I think that I would love to see, and it's just my goal with the podcast and going on my rants here and there, but it's just that, you know, when I look at the U.S. women's soccer team, or I look at the WNBA teams and how they use their platform to speak out about, you know, pay inequity, gender discrimination, racial justice, like, they roll together so tough that it's just inspiring, because, you know, these are women who, you know, have come forward and are using their voices, and they're not alone. Like, their whole team rallies behind them. And I just hope and just stay hopeful that pro cheerleading can also move in that direction, where we are willing to have transparency, share information. If you're intimidated about sharing things, I mean, I feel like I'm a vault here with the podcast, because there's a lot of information, and I appreciate that people respect that I'll, you know, honor their wishes for confidentiality, obviously. But I just think the more that we just have a little bit of courage to extend that branch, and maybe you're sharing what you get paid, and maybe we can see that, you know, this is what the Jacksonville Jaguars cheerleaders make, but over here, you know, the Vikings cheerleaders get this, that, and the third for their performances, their appearances. And we just start to use that information that we're sharing collectively with each other to raise the bar and to, you know, establish some baseline standards that are more appropriate than where we are now. And I just think it's possible. We just have to go for it. And I think we have to stand together.
Absolutely. And were there any players in the NFL who voiced any support?
No.
That's always nice. Yeah, I know, because I was thinking about how Serena Williams had fought to get equal pay for the women's tennis players, and the men were supportive of it as well, and they voiced that. And so it's nice to have that, but it's unfortunate when you don't have men using their power to also use their voice, because, hey, we're all in this together one way or the other. So that is very unfortunate. But I also want to ask each one of you, since we only have about 10 minutes left, in terms of the future and moving forward, what do you think is on the horizon in your perspective fields?
I guess I'll start. So, I mean, I like to think that on the horizon, we have more women coming out and speaking out and realizing they can be agents of change. And if, you know, one of the most recent examples that kind of plays to this women in sports is, think about the WNBA team in Georgia. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the team, but
Atlanta team, yeah.
Thank you. The team that was owned by soon-to-be former Senator Kelly Loeffler. I mean, those women came out for Warnock when nobody else was supporting him. And now he's going to be a senator from the state of Georgia. And that was about the sisterhood coming out and supporting change. So when women stand together and they make these statements about the way they want the world to look, which is what Lacy did when she did her lawsuit. Okay, women can make a change when they stand together and they stand up for what is right. So from my perspective as a woman lawyer who's been working in this field for 30 years, you know, I encourage and welcome women at all levels, whether they're janitors or, you know, some high-ranking official at Pinterest, because, you know, we've all read about her case also, that these women need to come forward. You know, obviously I like to do that as a matter of sisterhood, and I encourage those women to find women lawyers who would represent them. Not that men don't do a great job too. There are many fabulous lawyers out there, but as a matter of sisterhood, I think that we should all stand together and we should all encourage each other to try to change the world into something we want to see, something that we want our daughters to grow up in. And I mean, that's what motivated Lacy.
Thank you. Lacy, would you like to speak on it in terms of
Yeah.
the future and what you see on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, this past year, let's just erase it. But I am hopeful for the future, although I feel like we are in a tough time as a nation. Like, I am hopeful for my daughters. I guess my goal is to be an example to them in all that I do. I want them to know their worth and know their confidence and be proud of their intelligence and their talents and their dreams, and to speak up when it's hard, because sometimes it is hard, but to do it anyway. And I want to teach them that, and their friends and whoever I come in contact with. I don't know. I am hopeful. I mean, we are in tough times, but we just have to keep fighting. And I think we can do it. Just each day at a time. Like you said, we have to bond together and really support each other. And hey, this is a good step. You know, we've been talking about this conversation since 2015. So,
Yeah.
Makiba?
Well, you know, as the host of the podcast, it's been 2 years now. I think it's been encouraging to see just how these conversations at least have been more out in the open. My hope is that, I'll just be frank, that we unionize. I keep saying we as though I'm still out there dancing, but I really, you know, am very, very hopeful that we can move in that direction. I think the league is changing in terms of cheerleaders. You know, we have male cheerleaders now. I think there are just different considerations and concerns that we have around, you know, just our protection, whether that's, you know, in light of COVID-19 and how we're treated, whether, you know, our ability to even participate in the sport. I just think it's just now is the time that we collectively organize to, you know, just proactively create the future that we want for pro cheer. I just think it's something that we can't be complacent. I think we definitely have to be gracious about it and understanding that it's not a mark or a stain on your organization to push for something better and higher, and just thinking beyond yourself and how we can just improve it as a whole, as a league, not just your own individual situation, but your sisters and brothers that are on your team, and also your sisters and brothers throughout the rest of the league. So if we can unionize, I will be a happy camper.
All right. Lorena?
I love that. I mean, I kind of want to leave it at that as a former labor leader. That's what we need. I wrote the bill in California to ensure that everybody had the basic protections of being employees to have that next step. So, but I would add, in the field, I guess, of politics, hey, we are about to have our first woman and woman of color as a vice president of the United States. Like, that is so amazing and cool, but it's not enough. And that's what I hope we continue to work for. We are nowhere close to parity when you think about elected officials and women. A lot of people said, like, you know, it was amazing. You right away took this Raiderette case and decided to do legislation. It's like, yeah, when you elect people who have a background in cheerleading and labor law, you're going to get, you know, and that's probably going to be a woman. You know, you're going to get people who are like, no, this is important. And I had a lot of people mock me, a lot of men, like, this is the most important thing you could think of. And I was like, no, but it's important. And it's part of a broader global thing that we need to address. And so we need to elect more women. I'm hopeful that Kamala Harris will change the world for us, but it's not up to her alone. We've got to have her back, and we've got to have women's backs. And so I'm excited. And we have to allow and provide more opportunities for women to unionize unionize in workplace. This is what we know. We know that if you're in a unionized career, pay equity and the pay gap is exceedingly small, right? A union contract is your number one defense against having pay inequities. And so for me, if I can make it easier for women to be able to come together, or men, but all people, but women in particular, benefit from a union contract, women of color in particular, in a way that nobody else does. So we're going to continue to work on that.
Awesome. All right. So in closing, for those watching, cheerleaders, women, activists, and community organizers alike, I was wondering if each of you can kind of, share some words of encouragement for those who are looking to dismantle systems that were not built in their best interests. Sharon, I'll go ahead and throw it at you first.
I would say you have to believe that change is possible. I mean, I'm the oldest among those of us on this panel. And when I was a little girl, my parents used to tease me that I was going to be the first woman president. And they didn't say it in a way like that was possible, but in the, oh, wouldn't that be funny? Well, I now believe that in my lifetime, I am easily going to see at least one woman president. I mean, Kamala Harris is a heartbeat away. And
yeah.
we can make that change. Change is possible.
Absolutely. Lacy?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say you really have to sit with yourself and decide what it is that you want and who you are. And then you have to just go for it and muster all the braveness that you have. And I mean, that's my best advice, is just get up and go and see where it takes you. Yeah, it's amazing how, I have no regrets, and look at all this change. It was scary at times, but I mean, it's possible.
Absolutely. Makiba?
Wow, so many good things have been said already. I guess I would just add that really you're not seeking anyone's permission other than yourself to kind of go after what you believe is right. And so, to Lacy's point, once you sit with yourself and you know your worth, you evaluate things, think strategically, all of those things, but you're not looking for validation or confirmation or acceptance from others for something that just in your core does not feel right to you. I think you just have to listen to that voice and trust in it. And I think it won't lead you astray. And I just think people have to be true to that, because if you settle and you just accept something that is just not right, you're not going to feel good about it later. And you will have regrets, I would say, probably later on in life, that you didn't, as you get more mature or just a little bit more fortitude, that you'll regret and that you didn't take that chance on yourself. And I just think you're worth it. And like everybody said, go for it.
All right. And Lorena?
I would just say use, for those of us who were cheerleaders or understand being a cheerleader, use that skill, because there are two things you learn in cheerleading. One, there's always a new game next week. Right? So yeah, you may be down, you may be out, your team may be on the ropes, but the reason you do it is because you believe like next time we could win. And I think that is a spirit in life when we're fighting these big structural change in the patriarchy. It may not be this time, but we're getting there. And one step at a time, we will get there. We have to have that hope. And the other thing is be a cheerleader for other women. I mean, we really have to do that. When you see these great stories, I've seen Adrian's story. I mean, I want to be her cheerleader. I want to be Lacy's cheerleader. I want to be Makiva's cheerleader. Sharon's like in charge of us all. So, she doesn't need a cheerleader, but we have to learn to do that, because it is about the collective, and it is about all of us rising up together that will actually make the change. So.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those powerful words. And I want to thank everyone for joining us for A Woman's Work, Cheering on Change. And thank you to our wonderful panelists, Makiba Pate, Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, Lacy Thibodeaux Fields, and Sharon Vinnick. And also I want to remind everyone out there, please check out the documentary, A Woman's Work, the NFL Cheerleader Problem, and please keep cheering on in your own lives in terms of making change. We need your voices, elevate them, and do not hesitate to push forward. Thank you all, and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.